The medical bay of the Galactic Research Station Kepler-7 buzzed with urgent activity. Scientists from 12 different species worked frantically around a massive containment unit, their voices creating a cacophony of alien languages, mixed with the universal translator's mechanical interpretations. Dr. HFY, a tall crystalline being from the Vorthak Empire, stood at the head of the operation. His forearms moved in precise patterns as he operated the scanning equipment, while his compound eyes reflected the harsh white light emanating from the containment chamber. Inside lay something that had shaken the entire galactic community to its core. The creature was enormous, easily the size of a small spacecraft. Its hide appeared to shift between deep purple and midnight black, with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed weakly along what seemed to be major nerve pathways. Despite its intimidating size, there was something almost peaceful about its current state of unconsciousness. Its breathing was slow and labored, each exhale creating small clouds of vapor that the environmental systems quickly filtered away. "Status report," Dr. HFY commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades studying the most dangerous life forms in the galaxy. Dr. Mila Thornwick, the only human on the research team, looked up from her datapad. Her brown hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, and her blue eyes showed the exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept properly in days. "The cellular degradation is accelerating faster than our models predicted. At this rate, complete system failure will occur within 72 hours. A collective shudder ran through the assembled scientists. The creature before them wasn't just any alien life form. It was a void stalker, one of the most feared predators known to exist in the dark spaces between galaxies. These beings were legends made flesh, capable of surviving in the vacuum of space, feeding on energy itself, and possessing intelligence that rivaled most sentient species. 3 weeks ago, a mining expedition in the Outer Rim had discovered this particular stalker floating near a dead star system. Unlike the aggressive territorial behavior documented in previous encounters, this one had been different. It was sick, possibly dying, and showed no interest in attacking the miners who found it. Instead of fleeing as protocol demanded, the expedition leader had made the controversial decision to bring it back for study. "The neural activity is unlike anything we've seen before," reported Dr. Cathera, a insectoid Zephyrian whose chittering translated to rapid, excited speech. "The brain scans show patterns consistent with advanced cognitive function, but there's something else. Something that suggests this creature isn't just intelligent, it might be trying to communicate." Dr. HFY's crystalline form shifted to a darker hue, indicating deep concern. "That's impossible. Void stalkers are apex predators. They don't communicate with other species, they consume them." Mila frowned at her readings. "Maybe we don't understand them as well as we thought. Look at these biochemical markers." She gestured to her screen where complex molecular structures rotated in three-dimensional space. "These compounds aren't just breaking down randomly. There's a pattern here, almost like the creature's own body is attacking itself." "An autoimmune response?" Dr. HFY inquired. "More complex than that. It's as if the creature's cellular structure is fundamentally incompatible with something in its environment. But what could affect a being that can survive in the vacuum of space?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Yultaran, an elderly Meridian whose species was known for their philosophical approach to science, spoke up from his position near the life support monitors. His voice carried the weight of centuries of accumulated wisdom. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "we are asking the wrong question. Instead of wondering what is killing this creature, we should ask why it came to this region of space in the first place. Void stalkers are territorial beings. They don't leave their domains unless something forces them to." The room fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. If something had driven a void stalker from its territory, something powerful enough to threaten a creature that had no known natural predators, then the galaxy might be facing a threat far greater than anyone had imagined. Mila's datapad chimed with an incoming priority message. Her expression grew grave as she read the contents. "I'm receiving reports from the Galactic Council. 3 more stalkers have been found in the past week, all in similar conditions. All dying." Dr. HFY's crystalline structure began to resonate with a low harmonic frequency, a sign of extreme agitation among his people. "This changes everything. If multiple stalkers are suffering from the same condition, We're not dealing with an isolated medical case. This could be an extinction event. The implications were staggering. Void stalkers had existed for millions of years, surviving cosmic events that had wiped out entire civilizations. They were living legends, creatures so perfectly adapted to their environment that many scientists considered them immortal. If something could threaten their very existence, what hope did the younger species of the galaxy have? As if responding to their discussion, the creature's bioluminescent patterns suddenly flared brighter. The monitoring equipment registered a spike in neural activity, and for just a moment, the massive form seemed to twitch as if trying to move. "It's responding to our presence," Mila whispered, stepping closer to the containment unit. "Look at the brain scan patterns. They're changing, becoming more organized." Dr. Cathara's compound eyes widened. "The electromagnetic field around its cranial region is intensifying. If I didn't know better, I'd say it was trying to establish some form of mental contact." "Impossible," Dr. Zexhai stated firmly. "Our species have completely different neural architectures. There's no way a void stalker could interface with any of our minds." But even as he spoke, several of the scientists began backing away from the containment unit. There was something in the air now, a presence that seemed to press against their consciousness like a gentle but insistent tide. It wasn't malevolent, but it was definitely alien, definitely aware. Mila stood her ground, her scientific curiosity overriding her natural caution. What if we're wrong about them? What if they're not just predators? What if they're trying to tell us something? The creature's breathing pattern changed, becoming more rhythmic, almost like a form of communication. Its bioluminescent patterns pulsed in sync with its breath, creating a hypnotic display that seemed to draw the observer's attention despite their better judgment. In that moment, as the dying void stalker lay before them, the assembled scientists realized they were standing at the threshold of a discovery that could change everything they thought they knew about life in the galaxy. The question was, would they have enough time to understand what the creature was trying to tell them before it was too late? The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the great amphitheater of Nexus Prime, the political heart of known civilization. Representatives from 47 species filled the massive chamber, their varied forms creating a bizarre but beautiful tapestry of evolutionary diversity. The air hummed with tension as holographic displays showed the current status of the dying void stalkers, scattered across 3 different sectors of space. Chancellor Vexmore, a towering reptilian being whose species had led the council for the past century, called the session to order with a resonant boom of his ceremonial staff. His scales, normally a brilliant gold, had darkened to a worried bronze. "We face an unprecedented situation," he announced, his voice carrying easily through the vast chamber. "The reports from Research Station Kepler-7 confirm our worst fears. The void stalkers are dying, and we don't know why." A ripple of unease passed through the assembled delegates. Ambassador Kretal, representing the warlike Zephyrian hives, stood on her 6 legs and clicked her mandibles sharply. "With respect, Chancellor, why should we concern ourselves with the death of these monsters? The void stalkers have terrorized space lanes for millennia. Perhaps this is simply the galaxy's way of correcting an ancient mistake." Murmurs of agreement arose from several corners of the chamber. The Meridians, with their long philosophical traditions, nodded sagely. The crystalline collective resonated with harmonic approval. Even some of the more peaceful species seemed relieved at the prospect of a galaxy without void stalkers. But Dr. Mila Thornwick, who had been granted special permission to address the council, stood up in the human delegation section. Her small frame seemed insignificant among the towering aliens around her, but her voice carried clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. "Honorable delegates," she began, "I understand the fear these creatures have inspired throughout history. But what we're witnessing isn't cause for celebration, it's a warning." Chancellor Vexmore gestured for silence as the chamber erupted in discussion. "Dr. Thornwick, you have studied these creatures more closely than anyone. What do you mean by warning?" Mila activated her portable holographic display, and a 3-dimensional representation of a void stalker's cellular structure appeared above the assembly. "The damage we're seeing isn't natural aging or disease. Something is systematically breaking down their cellular integrity at the molecular level. But here's what's truly terrifying. The same energy signature we've detected in the stalkers has been found in other species as well." The chamber fell silent. Ambassador Thulwane of the Meridian Collective leaned forward with interest. Other species? Which ones? So far, we've detected trace amounts in samples from the ethereal mantas of the Veil Nebula, the quantum whales near Andromeda Station, and most concerning of all, in several of our own deep space exploration crews who have ventured into the dark reaches. The implications hit the assembly like a physical blow. If whatever was killing the Void Stalkers could affect other species, then this wasn't an isolated phenomenon. It was potentially a galaxy-wide extinction event. Ambassador Kretal's aggressive posture shifted to one of concern. Are you suggesting that we might face the same fate as these stalkers? I'm saying it's possible, Mila replied grimly. The Void Stalkers are the most resilient life forms we know of. If something can kill them, nothing in the galaxy is truly safe. Chancellor Vexmore's scales had turned completely black, a sign of deep distress among his people. What do you propose we do? Our greatest scientific minds have been studying this phenomenon for weeks with little progress. That's exactly the problem, Mila said, her voice growing more passionate. We're approaching this from the wrong angle. Every species represented here has been studying the stalkers as specimens, as objects to be dissected and analyzed. But what if they're not just dying? What if they're trying to communicate? The chamber erupted in derisive laughter. Ambassador Zilthok of the Silicon Confederacy spoke through his mechanical translator. Communication? Doctor, these are predators that have consumed entire crews without hesitation. They are no more capable of meaningful communication than a virus or a natural disaster. But Mila pressed on. 3 days ago, the stalker on Kepler-7 began generating complex electromagnetic patterns. Initially, we dismissed them as random neural firing from a dying brain. But when we analyzed the sequences, we found something remarkable. They weren't random at all. They were mathematical. She manipulated her holographic display, showing wave patterns that pulsed with obvious intentionality. Prime numbers, Fibonacci sequences, geometric progressions, all the building blocks of universal mathematical language. This creature is trying to tell us something. Dr. Yultaran, the elderly Meridian scientist, had been listening intently from the observation gallery. Now he requested permission to speak. If I may, Chancellor, I believe Dr. Thornwick may be correct. In our philosophical traditions, we have long believed that true intelligence always seeks connection, especially when facing extinction. Perhaps these beings are not the mindless predators we have always assumed them to be. The chamber buzzed with heated discussion. The very idea challenged thousands of years of accepted knowledge about Void Stalkers. They were apex predators, living weapons evolved by a hostile universe to consume and destroy. The concept that they might possess higher intelligence, that they might be capable of communication, was almost heretical. Ambassador Kretal stood again, her chittering voice sharp with skepticism. Even if this is true, even if these creatures are intelligent, why should we help them? They have shown us nothing but hostility for millennia. It was then that Ambassador Sarah Chen, the human representative to the Galactic Council, rose to address the assembly. Her gray hair and lined face spoke of decades of diplomatic experience, and her calm voice carried the weight of humanity's relatively recent but influential membership in galactic society. Because, she said simply, helping those who cannot help themselves is what separates civilization from chaos. Because understanding these creatures might be the key to saving not just them, but all of us. And because in the end, abandoning any intelligent species to extinction makes us no better than the monsters we fear them to be. Her words hung in the air like a challenge. The human delegation was small compared to the ancient, powerful species around them. But humanity had earned respect through their tenacity, their willingness to explore dangerous regions of space, and their peculiar habit of helping others even when it offered no obvious benefit. Chancellor Vexmore considered the arguments carefully. Dr. Thornwick, what would you need to continue this research? What resources would be required to attempt communication with these dying stalkers? Time, mostly, Mila replied, and the freedom to work without interference. Most importantly, I need the Council to resist the urge to treat this as a military problem. If we approach them with warships and weapons, we'll never learn what they're trying to tell us. The debate continued for hours, with species after species voicing their concerns, fears, and objections. But gradually, as the evidence mounted and the implications became clear, a consensus began to emerge. Whatever the Void Stalkers were, whatever they had done in the past, Their extinction might herald something far worse for the galaxy. Finally, Chancellor Vexmore called for a vote. All in favor of authorizing continued research and potential communication attempts with the surviving Void Stalkers? The vote was closer than many expected, but it passed. As the delegates began to file out of the chamber, Ambassador Chen approached Mila in the corridor outside. "You know this won't be easy," she said quietly. "Half the galaxy thinks you're insane for wanting to talk to them." Mila smiled grimly. "Maybe I am. But if I'm right, if these creatures are trying to warn us about something, then we can't afford not to listen. And if you're wrong, if they're just dangerous predators having some kind of neural breakdown." Mila looked out through the great windows of Nexus Prime at the stars beyond. "Then we'll find out soon enough. But I'd rather take that risk than abandon them without trying to understand." As the two humans stood looking out at the vast expanse of space, neither could know that their decision would soon put them at the center of the greatest crisis the galaxy had ever faced. The makeshift communication array on Research Station Kepler-7 looked like something from a scientist's fever dream. Cables snaked across the medical bay floor, connecting equipment from a dozen different civilizations. Human neural interface technology sat next to crystalline harmonic resonators, while meridian consciousness amplifiers hummed alongside Zephyrian bioelectric sensors. Dr. Mila Thornwick stood at the center of it all, her hands dancing across control surfaces as she made final adjustments to the most ambitious xenolinguistic experiment ever attempted. The dying Void Stalker lay just meters away in its containment unit, its bioluminescent patterns pulsing weakly but with increasing regularity. "Neural pathway synchronization at 43%, reported Dr. Cathara, her compound eyes monitoring multiple data streams simultaneously. "The electromagnetic resonance is building, but slowly." Dr. Yul Taran observed from his position near the consciousness amplifiers, his ancient form seeming almost frail among the high-tech equipment. "Patience, young ones. First contact with a truly alien intelligence cannot be rushed. We are attempting to bridge not just a language gap, but potentially millions of years of evolutionary divergence." It had been 2 weeks since the council vote, and the scientific community remained bitterly divided. Half of the researchers thought they were on the verge of the greatest discovery in galactic history. The other half were convinced they were wasting precious time that could be better spent finding a cure for whatever was killing the stalkers. Mila ignored the criticism. Every day brought new evidence that the creatures were more than mindless predators. The mathematical sequences had evolved into something more complex. Geometric patterns that seemed to reference star maps, energy frequencies that corresponded to known physics constants, and, most intriguingly, what appeared to be attempts at reproducing the communication patterns of other species. "Wait," she said suddenly, her attention focused on a particular data stream. "Look at this. The creature is modulating its neural output to match human brainwave patterns. It's not just trying to communicate, it's trying to communicate with us specifically." Dr. Zexai, who had remained skeptical of the entire project, moved closer to examine the readings. His crystalline form had maintained a neutral gray coloration for days, indicating his scientific detachment. "That's actually quite remarkable. The precision required for such mimicry suggests a level of neural sophistication we never attributed to these beings." The stalker's breathing pattern changed, becoming more rapid and shallow. Its bioluminescent patterns flared brighter, creating complex mandalas of light that pulsed across its massive form. The monitoring equipment registered a surge in brain activity unlike anything they had recorded before. "It's working," Mila whispered, her hands flying over the interface controls. "I'm detecting structured thought patterns, organized neural firing sequences. This is definitely intentional communication. But communication about what? The patterns were beautiful, hypnotic even. But translating them into meaningful concepts was like trying to decipher music written for instruments that had never existed. The mathematical foundations were clear enough. The creature was definitely intelligent, definitely trying to convey information, but the actual meaning remained frustratingly elusive. Dr. Cathara suddenly stiffened, her antennae twitching with alarm. "Something's wrong. The creature's life signs are becoming erratic, heart rate increasing, neural activity spiking beyond safe parameters." The stalker's massive form began to convulse, its limbs twitching against the restraints of the containment unit. The bioluminescent patterns became chaotic, flashing in random bursts that hurt to look at directly. Alarms began blaring throughout the medical bay as the monitoring systems registered dangerous levels of electromagnetic radiation. "It's having some kind of seizure," Mila said, her training taking over as she began emergency procedures. Reduce the neural interface intensity, divert power from the consciousness amplifiers. But as her hands reached for the controls, something extraordinary happened. The chaotic light patterns suddenly coalesced into a single, brilliant display across the creature's entire body. For just a moment, the bioluminescence formed a perfect three-dimensional map of local space, complete with star systems, trade routes, and what appeared to be annotations in a language of pure light. And at the edge of the map, moving inexorably toward the heart of known civilization, was something that made every scientist in the room step back in horror. It was a darkness, a void that seemed to consume the very light around it, represented in the creature's display as an absence of all illumination. "By the crystalline depths," Dr. HFY whispered, his form flickering through a spectrum of alarmed colors. "It's not just showing us a map. It's showing us an invasion route." The display lasted only seconds before the stalker collapsed back into its previous state, its breathing labored and its patterns dim. But the image was burned into the memory of everyone who had witnessed it. The dying creature hadn't just been trying to communicate, it had been trying to warn them. Dr. Yultarin was the first to speak, his voice heavy with the weight of terrible understanding. "The Void Stalkers haven't been predators. They've been guardians. They've been holding something back, keeping it from reaching our part of the galaxy." Mila's hands were shaking as she reviewed the recorded data. "And now they're dying. Whatever they've been protecting us from, we're about to face it alone." The implications were staggering. Every encounter with Void Stalkers throughout recorded history would need to be re-examined. What had seemed like random attacks might have been desperate attempts to prevent other species from venturing too far into dangerous regions of space. The creature's apparent hostility might have been frustration at their inability to communicate the danger they were trying to prevent. "We need to contact the Council immediately," Dr. HFY said, his scientific objectivity warring with barely contained panic. "If this creature's display is accurate, we may be facing a threat that makes the stalkers look like pets." But even as they began preparing their emergency report, the questions multiplied faster than the answers. What was the dark force the stalkers had been fighting? How long did they have before it reached inhabited space? And most importantly, was there any way to save both the dying guardians and the civilizations they had been protecting? The stalker stirred weakly in its containment unit, its bioluminescent patterns flickering like a dying flame. Mila approached the transparent barrier, pressing her palm against the surface. For just a moment she could have sworn she felt something. Not physical contact, but a sense of presence, of desperate urgency, of a vast intelligence trying to bridge an impossible gap. "I hear you," she whispered to the dying creature. "I understand. You've been trying to protect us all along." The patterns pulsed once, gently, almost like acknowledgement. Then the creature's massive form settled back into the rhythmic breathing of deep unconsciousness, leaving the human scientists to grapple with a revelation that would change everything they thought they knew about life, death, and the true dangers lurking in the dark spaces between the stars. As emergency messages flew across the galactic communication networks, Dr. Mila Thornwick remained by the containment unit, watching over humanity's first true alien ally, a dying guardian, whose people had sacrificed themselves for millions of years to protect species that had never even known they existed. The irony was not lost on her that it had taken a human, a member of the galaxy's youngest, spacefaring civilization, to finally understand what the Void Stalkers had been trying to say all along. Sometimes, she realized, it took a fresh perspective to see the truth that everyone else had missed. But seeing the truth and acting on it were two very different things, and time was running out for both the Guardians and those they had died to protect. The emergency session of the Galactic Defense Council convened aboard the massive battle station Fortress Prime, hidden in the gravitational shadow of a neutron star. This was where the galaxy's military leaders gathered only in times of existential threat. The last time the station had been activated was during the Crystalline Rebellion 300 years ago. Fleet Admiral Korath, a battle-scarred veteran whose species had survived by being the finest warriors in known space, stood before the holographic displays showing the data from Kepler-7. His forearms were crossed in the traditional posture of his people when facing an impossible decision. Let me understand this correctly, he growled, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets through a dozen wars. You want us to believe that the Void Stalkers, the same creatures that have terrorized space lanes for millennia, have actually been protecting us? Dr. Mila Thornwick, looking small and out of place among the military brass, nodded firmly. The evidence is overwhelming, Admiral. Their attacks weren't random predation. They were attempts to keep our ships from venturing too far into specific regions of space. General Thexmar of the Zephyrian Warcast chittered aggressively. Even if this is true, these creatures have killed thousands of our people. They are monsters regardless of their supposed motivations. Monsters that were trying to save us from something far worse, Mila replied. She activated her portable display showing the star map the dying stalker had projected. This is what they've been fighting. Look at the progression patterns. The holographic display updated to show a time-lapse analysis of deep space sensor data spanning the past 1,000 years. Slowly but inexorably, dead zones had been expanding. Throughout the outer galaxies, regions where nothing lived, where even light seemed dimmed, where space itself appeared to be dying. Commander Sarah Chen, now acting as military liaison for the human delegation, stepped forward. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected similar phenomena. We attributed them to natural cosmic events, black holes, stellar collapse, dark matter fluctuations. We never considered that they might be artificial. Admiral Korath studied the data with the keen eye of someone who had spent his life identifying threats. The expansion pattern is too regular, too organized. This isn't cosmic decay, it's consumption. Something is eating the universe, one star system at a time. And the Void Stalkers have been fighting it, Dr. Yultaran added from his position near the communication array. For millions of years, they've been the only thing standing between this force and the rest of the galaxy. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Every species represented in the chamber had built their military doctrines around the assumption that the greatest threat to galactic civilization came from internal conflicts, wars between species, resource disputes, territorial expansion. No one had prepared for something that could threaten the very fabric of space itself. General Vexthai, leader of the Meridian Defense Forces, spoke in the measured tones of his philosophical species. If this is true, if the Stalkers have been our guardians all along, then their extinction represents the collapse of our first line of defense against something we don't understand. Worse than that, Mila said grimly. Our analysis suggests that whatever is causing the dead zones feeds on life force itself. The more complex the life form, the more energy it provides. The Stalkers, being some of the most sophisticated organisms in the galaxy, would have been the richest targets. Admiral Korath's expression darkened as understanding dawned. They're being systematically hunted. This force, whatever it is specifically targeting the Stalkers because they're the only thing capable of resisting it. Which means, Commander Chen added, that we're next. Once the Stalkers are gone, this thing will move on to the inhabited systems, and we'll be completely defenseless. The chamber fell silent as the military leaders grappled with a threat unlike anything in their collective experience. They were warriors, strategists, tacticians trained to fight battles against enemies they could see and understand. But how do you wage war against something that consumes the very foundation of existence? Captain Zilthara of the Silicon Confederacy Navy broke the silence. Her mechanical form hummed with processing power as she analyzed the tactical implications. What are our options? Can we develop weapons capable of fighting this force? Mila shook her head. We don't even understand what it is yet, let alone how to fight it. The only thing we know for certain is that the Void Stalkers have been more effective against it than anything else we've seen. Then we need to save them, Admiral Korath said with the decisive tone that had made him legendary among military circles. However many are left, whatever it takes, we need to keep them alive long enough to learn from them. General Thexmar's mandibles clicked with skepticism. Save them? Admiral, with respect, these creatures are dying from something we don't understand. Our best scientists can't even slow the progression, let alone reverse it. Then we try harder, Commander Chen interjected. We commit every resource. We have to understanding their condition and finding a cure. Because if we can't save them, we're all dead anyway. Dr. Yultaran activated his own display, showing the current locations of the surviving stalkers. There are 17 left, scattered across 6 sectors. All are in advanced stages of whatever is killing them. At the current rate of decline, we have perhaps weeks before the last one dies. The weight of that timeline settled over the assembled leaders like a physical burden. Weeks to understand a phenomenon that had been in progress for millions of years. Weeks to find a cure for a condition that was killing beings who had survived every cosmic catastrophe in recorded history. Weeks to prepare for a threat that could consume entire galaxies. "What do you need?" Admiral Korath asked Mila directly. "What resources, what authority, what support?" "Everything," she replied without hesitation. "I need access to every surviving stalker, the best scientific minds from every species, and the authority to override any objections or regulations that get in the way. Most importantly, I need these creatures to be treated as allies, not specimens." General Vexatai leaned forward with interest. "Allies? You believe they can be reasoned with?" "I know they can," Mila said with growing confidence. "The one on Kepler-7 has been responding to our communication attempts. It's weak, dying, but it's still trying to warn us. If we can establish proper contact, it might be able to tell us what we're really facing." Admiral Korath made his decision with characteristic swiftness. "Done. Operation Guardian Shield is now the galaxy's highest priority. Every resource, every ship, every scientist we have will be dedicated to this effort." He turned to address the assembled commanders. "Prepare your fleets for emergency deployment. We're going to collect every surviving stalker and bring them to the most secure facilities we have." "And if some species object to harboring these creatures?" General Thexmar asked. The Admiral's expression became granite hard. "Then they can explain their objections to whatever is coming to eat them. This isn't a request. It's a survival imperative." As the military leaders began coordinating the most unusual rescue operation in galactic history, Dr. Mila Thornwick found herself thinking about the dying stalker on Kepler-7. In just a few days, it had gone from being seen as a dangerous specimen to humanity's best hope for survival. The irony was staggering. The galaxy's most feared predators were about to become the most protected beings in known space. And a human scientist who had started by simply wanting to understand why they were dying was now leading the effort to save not just them but every living thing in the galaxy. But even as rescue ships launched toward the distant coordinates of dying stalkers, Mila couldn't shake the feeling that they were already running out of time. The dark force that had been held at bay for millions of years was growing stronger, more aggressive. And somewhere in the deep spaces between galaxies, ancient enemies were preparing for a final assault that would determine the fate of all life. The question was no longer whether they could save the Void Stalkers. The question was whether the Void Stalkers could save them. The medical facility on Sanctuary Station had been transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history, a hospital dedicated to treating the universe's most feared predators. 17 massive containment units lined the central chamber, each housing a dying Void Stalker. The creatures ranged in size from merely enormous to absolutely colossal, their bioluminescent patterns creating a haunting light show that pulsed through the station like a dying heartbeat. Dr. Mila Thornwick moved between the units with practiced efficiency, checking readings, adjusting treatments, and monitoring the complex web of equipment that now connected not just each stalker to life support systems, but connected them to each other. It had been her idea to link their neural networks based on the hypothesis that these creatures might be naturally telepathic. She had been right. "The collective neural activity is increasing exponentially," reported Dr. Cathara, her compound eyes tracking multiple data streams as she coordinated between the Zephyrian bioelectric sensors and the human neural interface technology. Individual brain patterns are synchronizing into something larger, more complex. Dr. Zexai, whose crystalline form had remained, a steady blue for days now, indicating intense fascination, operated the harmonic resonators that translated the stalker's electromagnetic communications into something approaching comprehensible patterns. "It's remarkable. Individually, each creature is barely conscious, dying slowly from cellular breakdown. But together, they're creating a collective intelligence that surpasses anything we've recorded." The transformation had been gradual at first. When the rescue fleets had brought the surviving stalkers to Sanctuary Station, each creature had been isolated, individual, focused only on its own slow death. But as they were brought together, something extraordinary had happened. Their separate neural patterns had begun to merge, creating a shared consciousness that was somehow greater than the sum of its parts, and this collective intelligence was desperate to communicate. "Dr. Thornwick," called out Commander Chen from the communication station, "we're receiving structured transmissions on 17 different frequencies simultaneously. The mathematical complexity is beyond anything we've seen before." Mila hurried to the main console where Dr. Yultaran was already working to decode the incoming patterns. The elderly Meridian's philosophical approach to communication had proven invaluable in bridging the gap between human understanding and stalker intelligence. "They're not just trying to warn us anymore," he said, his ancient voice filled with wonder. "They're trying to teach us. Look at these sequences. They're showing us their history, their purpose, their millennia-long war against the darkness." The main display activated, showing a three-dimensional representation of the galaxy as it had been millions of years ago. But this wasn't any historical record from their databases. This was memory, preserved in the collective consciousness of dying guardians. The image showed the galaxy teeming with life, but not the life they knew today. Ancient civilizations that had risen and fallen long before any current species had evolved filled the display. Vast empires that spanned multiple star systems, technologies that bent the laws of physics, art and culture and science that had reached heights current civilization could barely imagine. And then came the darkness. It started small, at the very edge of galactic space. A creeping void that consumed not just planets or stars but the very fabric of reality itself. Where it passed, space became empty, not just of matter and energy but of the potential for existence itself. It was entropy given form, the heat death of the universe accelerated and directed. "By the depths," whispered Dr. Zexai, his crystalline form flickering through colors of horror and fascination. "It's not just destroying life, it's unmaking creation itself." The Stalkers' collective memory showed how the ancient civilizations had tried to fight. Vast fleets had been sent against the encroaching void. Weapons that could destroy entire star systems had been turned against it. Nothing had worked. The darkness consumed them all, growing stronger with each victory. But then something unexpected had happened. A species that had lived in the deep spaces between galaxies, creatures that fed on cosmic radiation and swam through the vacuum of space like others, moved through water, had encountered the void, and survived. Not just survived, they had learned to fight it. "The original void stalkers," Mila breathed, watching as the memory showed the first encounters between the space-dwelling creatures and the consuming darkness. They weren't predators at all. They were immune. The collective memory showed how these ancient beings had adapted, evolved, changed themselves into living weapons against entropy itself. They had sacrificed their original nature, becoming something fiercer, more aggressive, more territorial, not because they wanted to, but because the universe needed guardians who could stand against the ultimate predator. For millions of years, they had held the line. They had driven the darkness back to the very edges of reality, containing it in the spaces between galaxies where nothing else could survive. And all that time, new species had evolved. New civilizations had risen, never knowing that their existence was protected by creatures they considered monsters. "They've been alone this entire time," Dr. Yultaran said softly, his philosophical mind grappling with the tragedy of it. Millions of years of isolation, fighting a war that no one understood, protecting people who feared and hated them. The memory sequence shifted, showing more recent events. The darkness had found a way to adapt, to evolve its own strategies. It had begun targeting the stalkers specifically, using some kind of weapon that attacked them at the cellular level. The Guardians were being systematically exterminated, and their deaths were weakening the barriers that kept the void contained. "It's not just killing them," Mila realized with growing horror. "It's studying them, learning from each death. Every stalker that dies makes the darkness stronger and more capable of fighting the survivors." Commander Chen looked up from her tactical displays with grave concern. "How long do we have? How long before the barriers fail completely?" The stalker's collective response came not in mathematical sequences or light patterns, but in a sensation that pressed directly against the consciousness of everyone in the facility. It was the psychic equivalent of holding up fingers, weeks, not months, days, not years, but along with the warning came something else. Hope. The collective intelligence was sharing not just the problem, but a potential solution. The images that flooded the display showed the stalker's own bodies, their cellular structure, the very genetic code that had allowed them to survive contact with the void. "They're giving us their immunity," Dr. Cathara said, her voice filled with awe. "They're sharing the biological adaptations that make them capable of fighting the darkness." Dr. Zexhai was already running calculations, his crystalline form cycling through every color in the spectrum as he processed the implications. The genetic modifications required would be extensive. We're talking about fundamentally altering the cellular structure of entire species. The risks are irrelevant, Mila interrupted, her decision made with the same certainty that had driven every choice in her career. Because the alternative is total extinction, not just of our civilizations but of the possibility of life itself. The collective intelligence pulsed with something that might have been gratitude. For the first time in millions of years, the Guardians were no longer alone. Someone finally understood their sacrifice, their purpose, their desperate hope that the species they had protected might be capable of taking up their burden. But even as the scientific teams began the monumental task of analyzing stalker genetics, even as medical facilities across the galaxy prepared for the most ambitious genetic modification project in history, the darkness at the edge of space was stirring. The barriers were weakening with each passing hour, and the ancient enemy was preparing for its final assault. The race was on. Could they transform themselves into new guardians before the old ones failed completely? Could the species that had once feared the Void Stalkers become worthy successors to their legacy? And perhaps most importantly, would the galaxy's youngest spacefaring civilization, humanity, prove capable of carrying a burden that had defined millions of years of cosmic history? The answers would determine not just the fate of current civilization, but the future of existence itself. And in the medical bays of Sanctuary Station, dying Guardians watched with ancient hope as their former enemies prepared to become their heirs. The transformation center aboard Sanctuary Station hummed with activity, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Representatives from every major species stood in lines before medical pods that would alter them at the most fundamental level, rewriting their genetic code to incorporate the Void Stalker's immunity to the consuming darkness. Dr. Mila Thornwick stood at the central control station, monitoring the first wave of volunteers as they underwent the radical procedure. The genetic modifications were extensive, requiring changes to cellular structure, neural pathways, and even basic metabolism. It was dangerous, potentially fatal, and absolutely necessary. Transformation success rate holding steady at 73%, reported Dr. Cathara, her compound eyes tracking dozens of medical readings simultaneously. The crystalline subjects are showing the highest compatibility, while the silicon-based life forms are having more difficulty with the neural modifications. Each species reacted differently to the stalker genetics. The Meridians, with their naturally expanded consciousness, adapted quickly to the enhanced mental capabilities. The Zephyrians found their aggressive nature intensified, but also gained the ability to perceive dimensional fluctuations that normal eyes couldn't detect. The crystalline beings discovered they could resonate with the quantum frequencies that the darkness used to unmake reality, but it was the humans who showed the most surprising results. "Dr. Thornwick," called Commander Chen from her monitoring station, "you need to see this. The human volunteers are showing unprecedented adaptation rates, 94% successful integration, and the modifications are stabilizing faster than our models predicted." Mila hurried to examine the data, her heart racing as she saw the readings. Not only were humans adapting to the stalker genetics with remarkable ease, but they were developing capabilities that even the original stalkers had never possessed. Enhanced spatial awareness, improved resistance to entropy effects, and something else, she murmured, studying the neural scan of Lieutenant Marcus Webb, one of the first human volunteers. "His brain is developing entirely new neural pathways, ones that don't exist in any known species." Dr. Yultarin approached, his ancient form moving with difficulty, but his mind as sharp as ever. The collective intelligence of the stalkers has been monitoring the transformations. They are excited. In all their millions of years of existence, they have never seen adaptations like this. "What's different about us?" Mila asked, though part of her suspected she already knew the answer. "Flexibility," came the response. Not from Dr. Yultaran, but from the stalkers themselves. Their collective consciousness speaking through the station's communication systems in a voice that was somehow both alien and familiar. "Your species changes, adapts, evolves not just biologically, but culturally, mentally, spiritually. You are transformation made manifest." The implications were staggering. While other species had evolved to fill specific niches, to become perfectly adapted to their environments, humans had evolved to adapt itself. They were generalists in a galaxy of specialists, and that generalist nature was allowing them to integrate with stalker genetics in ways no one had anticipated. But there was no time to fully explore these developments. The monitoring stations at the edge of known space were reporting increasingly urgent data about the approaching darkness. The barriers that the stalkers had maintained for millions of years were failing faster than anyone had expected. Admiral Korath's voice crackled through the communication system from his command ship. "Dr. Thornwick, we need those modified personnel ready for deployment immediately. Our deep space sensors are detecting massive distortions at 17 different breach points. Whatever's been contained out there is making its move." Mila looked at the transformation centers where hundreds of beings were still undergoing the dangerous procedure. "Admiral, we need more time. The process can't be rushed without risking fatal complications." "Time is what we don't have," came the grim response. "The first breach is expected within 6 hours. How many transformed personnel can you have ready by then?" Dr. Cathara consulted her data displays quickly. "Current successful transformations number 437 across all species. The human contingent will be ready first. Their recovery time is remarkably short." The collective intelligence of the dying stalkers pulsed through the station's systems, and suddenly the main display activated to show something that made everyone freeze. It was a real-time view of the galaxy's edge, transmitted through sensors that the stalkers themselves had placed in the deep void millions of years ago. The darkness was no longer creeping slowly forward. It was surging, moving with purpose and intelligence, consuming entire systems in a matter of hours rather than years. And at its leading edge were shapes that defied comprehension, entities that seemed to be made of the void itself, creatures of unbeing that served as the darkness's scouts and warriors. "They know," whispered Dr. Yultaran, his philosophical composure finally cracking. "The darkness knows what we're doing. It's accelerating its assault to prevent us from completing the transformation." Mila made the hardest decision of her life. Emergency deployment protocol. All successfully transformed personnel report to combat stations immediately. We'll have to finish this fight with whoever we have ready. Within minutes, the hangar bays of Sanctuary Station were filled with beings who were no longer entirely what they had been. The transformed volunteers moved differently now, their enhanced senses processing information in ways their original species never could. They could feel the approaching darkness like a weight on their souls. But they could also sense something else, the quantum pathways that might allow them to fight back. Lieutenant Webb, the human volunteer, approached Mila as she prepared her own transformation pod. "Doctor, are you sure about this? The procedure is dangerous enough under controlled conditions." She looked at him, noting how his eyes now held flecks of the same bioluminescence that had marked the Void Stalkers. "Marcus, in about 5 hours, that darkness is going to break through into our galaxy. When it does, it won't just kill us, it will unmake us, erase us from existence so completely that we'll never have been born. I'd rather die trying to stop that than live knowing I could have made a difference." As she stepped into the transformation pod, the collective intelligence of the stalkers spoke one final time through the station's systems. "The burden passes to you now. Guard well what we could not protect alone." The medical systems activated, and Dr. Mila Thornwick felt her human nature begin to merge with something far older, far more dangerous and far more necessary than she had ever imagined. Around her, the newly transformed Guardians prepared for humanity's first battle against the darkness that sought to devour existence itself. But even as they readied for war, the question remained, would their hastily acquired abilities be enough to succeed where the original stalkers had fought alone for millions of years? The answer would come soon enough, when the barriers finally failed and the galaxy faced its ultimate test of survival. In the medical bay, the 17 dying stalkers pulsed with their fading bioluminescence. Their collective consciousness focused entirely on the beings who would soon take their place as guardians of reality itself. For the first time in eons, they were no longer alone in their vigil against the dark. The first breach opened like a wound in reality itself, a tear in the fabric of space that vomited forth creatures of pure entropy. Admiral Korath watched from the bridge of his flagship as his transformed crew prepared for a battle unlike any in galactic history. Dr. Mila Thornwick, now bearing the genetic legacy of the Void Stalkers, stood at the tactical station beside him. Her transformation had been successful, but the changes went far beyond the physical. She could feel the darkness pressing against her consciousness, could sense its hunger for the complete annihilation of existence itself. "Contact in 30 seconds, reported Commander Chen, her voice steady despite the unprecedented nature of what they faced. The genetic modifications had enhanced her tactical awareness to superhuman levels. She could perceive patterns in the enemy's movement that would have been invisible before. Through the viewports, they could see them coming. The servants of the void were nothing like any life form in known databases. They were absences given shape, creatures that seemed to absorb light and matter and possibility itself. Where they passed, space became gray and lifeless, drained of the fundamental forces that held reality together. All ships, remember your training, Admiral Korath broadcast to the hastily assembled fleet. These things feed on conventional matter and energy. Your enhanced weapon systems are designed to disrupt their quantum coherence directly. Aim for the core signatures, and whatever you do, don't let them touch the hull." The transformed personnel aboard each ship could feel what their unmodified comrades could not. The approaching entities radiated wrongness, a fundamental contradiction to everything that should exist. But they could also sense something else, weak points. Quantum fluctuations where the creature's unnatural existence became vulnerable. Lieutenant Webb, now serving as tactical coordinator for the human contingent, called out coordinates to the weapon systems. Firing solution locked. Initiating quantum disruption pulse. The new weapons, based on technology extracted from the dying stalker's genetic memories, lanced out across space. Instead of conventional energy beams, they fired concentrated packets of reality itself, quantum structures that forced the void creatures back into coherent existence, making them vulnerable to conventional attack. The first volley struck home, and several of the entropy beings simply ceased to exist. Their impossible forms unable to maintain coherence when confronted with weapons designed specifically to counter their nature. But for every creature that fell, 3 more emerged from the breach. "It's not working," reported Captain Zilthera from her command ship. "We're destroying them individually, but they're learning, adapting their quantum structure to resist our weapons." Dr. Mila could feel the truth of it through her enhanced senses. The darkness behind the creatures was ancient, intelligent, patient. It had had millions of years to study the Void Stalkers' tactics, and now it was applying those lessons against their successors. But then something unexpected happened. The human contingent began moving in ways that defied standard tactical doctrine. Instead of maintaining formation and firing in coordinated volleys, they started to improvise, to adapt, to change their approach mid-battle in ways that confused both their allies and their enemies. "Webb, what are your people doing?" Admiral Korath demanded as he watched human ships break from formation and begin engaging the enemy in seemingly random patterns. "Something the stalkers never could," came the reply. "We're not just fighting them. We're learning from them, adapting to them in real time. Watch." The human ships began to move in complex spirals, their weapons firing in sequences that created interference patterns in the void creature's quantum structure. Instead of trying to destroy them directly, they were disrupting the fundamental forces that allowed the entities to exist. And it was working. The creatures began to falter, their forms becoming unstable as the chaotic human tactics created quantum resonance patterns that their ancient intelligence couldn't predict or counter. "How?" Dr. Yiltaran asked from his position at the communication station, his philosophical mind struggling to comprehend the tactical implications. Mila felt the answer through her enhanced connection to the Stalker collective consciousness. The Stalkers fought them the same way for millions of years, with discipline, with coordination, with the tactics of guardians holding a line. But humans don't just hold lines. We cross them, we break them, we rewrite the rules entirely. The battle turned. What had seemed like an unstoppable tide of entropy began to fragment as the human contingent's chaotic tactics spread throughout the combined fleet. Commanders from every species began to abandon their traditional approaches, following the humans' example of constant adaptation and improvisation. But the real victory came from an unexpected source. In the medical bay of Sanctuary Station, the 17 dying stalkers made a final, desperate choice. Using the last of their life force, they projected their consciousness directly into the battle, not to fight, but to communicate. For the first time in millions of years, the servants of the void heard a voice they recognized, the voice of their ancient enemies, speaking not in defiance but in invitation. Join us, the collective consciousness of the stalkers whispered across the quantum dimensions. You have fought entropy for so long that you have become entropy. But existence and non-existence are not enemies. They are partners in the dance of reality. The effect was immediate and profound. The void creatures stopped their assault, their forms wavering as they processed concepts they had not considered in eons. They were the immune system of the universe, designed to prevent the heat death that would come from uncontrolled expansion. But they had become so focused on their purpose that they had forgotten the balance that their existence was meant to preserve. The new guardians understand, continued the stalker's fading voice. They do not seek to destroy you, but to work with you. Entropy and order, creation and destruction, existence and void, all are necessary for reality to continue. Through her enhanced consciousness, Mila could feel the moment of decision rippling across the cosmic battlefield. The void creatures were considering something that their ancient programming had never allowed: cooperation instead of consumption, balance instead of victory. Slowly, tentatively, the servants of the void began to withdraw from the galaxy's edge, not in defeat but in recognition that their purpose could be served without the complete annihilation of all existence. The darkness that had threatened reality itself began to organize into something different, a force that would consume only what needed to be consumed, that would bring entropy only where it was required to maintain cosmic balance. As the battle ended, the 17 void stalkers on Sanctuary Station pulsed once more with their ancient bioluminescence, their collective consciousness radiating something that might have been peace. Their vigil was finally over. The burden of guardianship had passed to beings who understood not just how to fight the darkness, but how to negotiate with it. Is it really over? Commander Chen asked, watching as the void creatures disappeared back through their dimensional breach. Dr. Mila Thornwick, forever changed by her transformation, nodded slowly. This battle is over, but we're guardians now. There will always be new threats, new challenges, new balances to maintain. The difference is we won't have to face them alone. Throughout the galaxy, the transformed members of dozens of species felt the truth of her words. They were no longer just individuals representing their own civilizations. They were part of something larger, guardians of reality itself, protectors of the delicate balance between existence and void. And in the deep spaces between galaxies, the servants of entropy settled into new patterns, no longer seeking to unmake all of creation, but working to ensure that the universe continued its endless dance of birth and death, order and chaos, being and non-being. The Void Stalkers had passed their burden to worthy successors, beings who understood that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from defeating your enemies, but from helping them remember what they were really fighting for. Humanity had taken its first step toward becoming something greater than any single species. They had become partners in the cosmic ballet that would determine the fate of existence itself. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth that only the galaxy's youngest spacefaring civilization had been flexible enough to grasp. Sometimes the monsters aren't trying to destroy you. Sometimes they're trying to save you, and sometimes the best way to save the universe is to help your enemies remember why it's worth saving in the first place.